The genes that we see, the gene map that's been created here, tells a very fascinating historical and evolutionary story about populations, where they once were, where they went to through migration.
For centuries, people have divided humanity into races, believing that these categories reflected deep biological differences. Entire societies were built around assumptions about ancestry, appearance, and identity. Then scientists launched one of the most ambitious genetic projects in history. By comparing DNA samples from populations across the globe, they hoped to understand how humans are related. What they discovered challenged long-held beliefs, overturned popular assumptions, and revealed a story far more surprising than anyone expected. The results changed our understanding of humanity forever. The largest DNA comparison in human history. The quest to understand human genetic diversity accelerated during the late 20th century, when advances in genetic sequencing made it possible to examine DNA on an unprecedented scale. Researchers traveled to some of the most remote regions on Earth, collecting samples from indigenous communities in the Amazon, villages in Africa, populations throughout Europe and Asia, Pacific Islanders, and Native American groups. Their goal was simple but ambitious: determine how much genetic variation existed among human populations and whether traditional ideas about race matched what was written in our DNA. The project generated enormous amounts of data. Millions of genetic markers were analyzed and compared between populations that had been separated by geography, language, and culture for thousands of years. Many scientists expected to find substantial genetic differences between racial groups. After all, physical differences such as skin color, hair texture, and facial features seem obvious. If these visible traits differed so dramatically, perhaps the genetic differences beneath the surface would be equally significant. The results immediately surprised researchers. Despite outward appearances, all humans share approximately 99.9% of their DNA. The remaining fraction contains the genetic variations that make each person unique. While scientists expected this small percentage to neatly separate humanity into distinct racial categories, the data told a very different story. The analysis revealed that traditional racial classifications did not align with genetic reality. Human genetic variation existed on a continuum rather than in clear-cut categories. People from different continents often shared more genetic similarities than expected, while individuals from the same geographic region sometimes showed greater differences than scientists predicted. Researchers soon realized that the greatest genetic diversity on Earth was not found between continents, but within Africa itself. This discovery became one of the most important findings in modern genetics. African populations contained more genetic variation than all non-African populations combined. In some cases, two individuals from different African populations were more genetically distinct from one another than either was from someone living thousands of miles away in Europe or Asia. This pattern supported the growing evidence that modern humans originated in Africa. Because humanity spent most of its evolutionary history there, African populations accumulated the greatest amount of genetic diversity. When small groups eventually migrated out of Africa tens of thousands of years ago, they carried only a portion of that diversity with them. Every population outside Africa ultimately descended from those relatively small groups of migrants. The implications were enormous. Instead of separate biological races developing independently, the genetic evidence pointed to a shared origin and a deeply interconnected human family tree. The more scientists analyzed the data, the clearer it became that the concept of race was far more complicated than anyone had imagined. The shocking truth about human differences. As researchers dug deeper into the genetic data, they uncovered another surprising reality. The traits people most commonly associate with race are controlled by a tiny fraction of the human genome. Skin color, eye color, hair texture, and certain facial features account for only a small number of genetic differences among billions of DNA letters. These visible traits are often the first things people notice about one another. But genetically, they represent only a tiny part of what makes a person unique. In fact, many of these characteristics evolved relatively recently in human history. Light skin pigmentation in Europe emerged only within the last several thousand years. Blue eyes appeared even more recently and can be traced back to a common ancestor who lived thousands of years ago. Scientists discovered that these traits evolved as adaptations to local environments. Skin color, for example, is closely connected to sunlight exposure. Populations living near the equator developed darker skin to protect against intense ultraviolet radiation, while populations in northern regions evolved lighter skin to help produce vitamin D in environments with less sunlight. What shocked researchers was how little these visible differences actually revealed about the rest of a person's genetics. Traits related to intelligence, athletic ability, personality, and health are influenced by thousands of genes interacting with environmental factors. They do not correspond neatly to racial categories. The study also revealed extensive mixing between populations throughout history. Contrary to popular belief, human populations have rarely remained isolated for long periods. Trade, migration, conquest, and cultural exchange repeatedly brought different groups together. As a result, genetic ancestry is often far more complex than people assume. Many individuals who identify strongly with one ethnic or racial group carry ancestry from multiple regions of the world. Ancient DNA studies demonstrated that migration and intermarriage have shaped nearly every population on Earth. Europeans, for example, are descended from multiple ancestral groups that entered the continent at different times. Similar patterns emerged throughout Asia, Africa, and the Americas. The idea of racial purity collapsed under genetic scrutiny. Scientists found no evidence that any population existed in complete isolation or remained genetically unchanged throughout history. Instead, human history appeared as an ongoing process of movement, adaptation, and mixing. Researchers also examined genes associated with disease. Certain genetic conditions appeared more frequently in specific populations, but these patterns were linked to environmental adaptations rather than racial divisions. The sickle cell trait, for instance, became common in regions where malaria was prevalent because it provided protection against the disease. Similar examples appeared across the globe. These findings challenged long-standing assumptions in medicine. Using race as a shortcut for predicting genetic risk proved far less accurate than examining an individual's actual genetic background. Two people categorized as belonging to the same race could have dramatically different genetic profiles, while people from different racial groups might share important genetic traits. The evidence increasingly pointed toward a remarkable conclusion. Human differences were real, but they did not fit the simplistic categories society had created. The boundaries between races blurred and disappeared when viewed through the lens of genetics. What DNA revealed about humanity? Perhaps the most profound discovery emerged when scientists examined humanity's shared ancestry. By tracing genetic lineages backward through time, researchers found that all living humans are connected through a surprisingly recent network of common ancestors. Every person's family tree expands exponentially with each generation. As scientists modeled these connections, they discovered that the ancestry of modern populations overlaps far more than previously imagined. Individuals living on opposite sides of the world today often share ancestors who lived only a few thousand years ago. This finding transformed our understanding of human history. Rather than existing as separate branches, populations repeatedly intersected and exchanged genes throughout time. Human ancestry resembles a vast web rather than isolated lines. Ancient DNA studies further reinforced this conclusion. Researchers extracted genetic material from skeletons thousands of years old and compared it with modern populations. Time after time, the results revealed unexpected migrations, population replacements, and episodes of mixing. Europeans were found to descend from multiple waves of migrants. Native American populations showed evidence of complex migration patterns across ancient land bridges. East Asian populations displayed genetic histories involving numerous ancestral groups. Every region examined revealed a far more intricate story than traditional racial categories suggested. Scientists also learned that human adaptation often followed similar patterns in different parts of the world. Populations facing comparable environmental challenges frequently evolved similar traits independently. This process, known as convergent evolution, demonstrated that similar physical characteristics do not necessarily indicate close genetic relationships. The largest DNA comparison ever conducted revealed something extraordinary. If you enjoyed this fascinating journey into human genetics, be sure to like and subscribe for more incredible stories from science, archaeology, and history.